Welcome to The Better Part. I'm Marilyn Priel. We're going to be talking about flying small airplanes. Come join us.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program by and for seniors and devoted to exploring the many facets of those better years of our lives. The name of our program was inspired by a quotation from Robert Browning. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Now, sit back and enjoy a program made especially to provide seniors with useful information, plus some lighter moments to brighten your day.
Our guest is a retired mathematics instructor. She's published 90 mathematic papers. When she was 53, she learned to fly an airplane. She has more than 1,600 hours as a pilot, and she belongs to the prestigious flying club, the 99s. I'm really happy to introduce Marjorie Johnson. I'm really pleased to have you here, Marjorie.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I think it would be nice if we begin the program by you telling us that really nice story about how you started to become a flyer.
Well, my husband learned to fly before I did, and I went with him a few times, but I didn't enjoy it very much. In fact, he scared me a couple of times. But he decided to buy an airplane, and he knew that I didn't think that was a very good idea. So he got a blank card. It had roses on it, and he made a set of aircraft keys, put them in there with a note that said, "Come fly away with me."
It was so romantic that you decided that you just learned to fly with him, huh?
Well, if you own half of an airplane, you should know more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I didn't think I would learn to fly. I thought that if I had some flying lessons and knew more about it, I'd get over some of my fears, or in the worst case, if something happened to the pilot and I was in the air, I'd be able to land that airplane.
Now, you told me a while back that you had taken some classes. One was it was called a flying companion.
Oh, yes. The 99s, that's an international group of women pilots, once a year in San Jose, has a flying companion seminar. And what that is to acquaint someone who doesn't have a license with what goes on in the airplane so that they'll feel more comfortable when they fly with their pilot friend.
And then what about the pinch hitting class that you took?
Oh, I also did that.
So does that actually teach you how, like in case your partner had a heart attack or something, that
yes,
you could take over?
In the pinch hitter class, you go up with an instructor and you sit in the passenger seat where you always sit, and then he shows you how to land the plane. And of course he's there. If he doesn't like something about your landing, he can take it around. But when you try that a few times and find out that it isn't so bad, after all, you feel much better.
In order to get your license, do you have to have so many hours of instructions, like a specific amount?
Yes, they have a minimum amount, except practically no one ever makes it that way. And that you have to have, I think, a minimum of 40 hours. And you have 20 hours of solo flight that you do. And this is when your instructor turns you loose and you go out and you land at other airports and you make some short cross countries. And you have to have at least 20 hours of instruction with the instructor aboard before that, and a certain number of landings and so on. But I think that an average person these days has closer to 80 hours before they get their license. One thing that happens is that there are many more instruments, and you have to learn how to use the radio, things that weren't there in the old days.
Well, now, do you learn all the instruments when you're on the ground before you go up into the air to learn the flying?
Yes and no. You study that before you go up into the air, but the only way to really learn those instruments is to use them. And when you're just getting your pilot's license, you learn the just rudimentary things. Like you can read your altimeter and you learn to keep yourself within 200 feet of the altitude you're supposed to have, for example. And you learn what they all do and how to adjust the speed so that it's the speed that you want, and how to use the radio so you can communicate. And you learn some rudimentary navigational instruments. But if you want to get an instrument rating, you have to be able to fly. Well, it'd be like you'd be flying, driving in the fog or driving blindfolded, except that you're not really blindfolded because you can see all of the instruments in the cockpit. And then you have to get very well acquainted with each instrument, you know what it does, and be able to adjust it when the needle starts moving away from the center. Or these days when the numbers change.
So do you have to know about the mechanics of the operation of the plane? Because I would think,
Yes.
you know, like in a car you hear certain sounds and then you can kind of say, I think I have a problem or something.
That's very important because you can't pull over to the side of the road when you're in the air. And the instructors practice many emergencies with you. They'll do something like, say your engine just failed, land somewhere, and all they do is pull the power back to idle, and then that comes close to what would happen if the engine failed, and then you set it for the proper glide speed, and you pick out a place to go and you circle over it and pretend like you're going to land there. Of course, they don't have you really get that low to the ground and do it. They don't want to have a real emergency.
So they teach you how to fly in the fog?
When you get an instrument rating.
Okay.
Before that, you cannot fly into any fog, or you're not even supposed to get close to a cloud.
So when you go to get your license, do they have an examiner? Like when you get your car driver's license, you have to ride with, and not your instructor, but
another
an examiner.
person. Well, you have a written test along the way that tests you on everything from the weather, what makes an airplane fly, how the engine works. Then you practice maneuvers and things, and then you go with an examiner, and he checks out how well you land the airplane, has you do some of the maneuvers that they have. Things like if you can circle over a point, so you stay in the same altitude and the same distance from it. Different maneuvers that you learn.
And then when you become once you have your license, then it's like an operator's license. But once you want to take off from an airport, do you have to show them that you also have an instrument license?
No.
In case there's bad weather or something?
No, they trust you for that.
Oh, okay.
But they could easily check on it, because before you fly into, say, fog, you have checked the weather with the controllers and you have filed a flight plan. And so they know who it is who has that airplane and their name and all of that.
And they know where you're going because they know the weather, where your destination.
Right. And then you, so when you open your flight plan, they know exactly what airplane it is and who filed the flight plan. And you would not be doing that if you didn't have an instrument rating, but they could easily check it if they wanted to. There's a lot of trust that goes on there.
You talked about being blindfolded. So that's to learn to fly through a dark storm or at night, for instance?
The blindfold, I was making something that would make you understand that you couldn't look outside. You really are not blindfolded because you have to be able to see your instruments. And there, you can have cockpit lighting, just like inside of a car, or you can have a flashlight, And one of the things you carry in the flight bag is a flashlight.
Talk to pilots who say they become disoriented, especially at night, that
Yes.
maybe they don't know if they're flying up or down or...
Well, it's a very strange sensation, particularly if there's no moon. You don't know where the horizon is.
Mm-hmm.
And you're all right for a short period of time because things seem normal, but as soon as you do something like turn the airplane, your body gives you strange signals. And you can, you can be descending slightly, but you're flying in a straight line. And you might feel like you're turning to the right. So you turn to the left to compensate. And then that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And you get all kinds of false feelings. And if you do something because you think you're descending, like pulling back on the yoke, that slows you down as well as going up, and it can be a big mistake.
So there's nothing in your instruments that would tell you that you've overcorrected, or?
Oh yes.
Oh, they do, but
Because
you probably...
you have a needle or a number that tells you what your course is supposed to be, and you can tell by looking at instruments that you're deviating from that. You can look at your altimeter and see that you're descending slightly. And you have a turn coordinator, and you can look at an artificial pilot thing in there that shows you if your airplane is straight and level or not.
Now, I know that they were saying that JFK Jr. probably became disoriented driving at night because he was not that trained in using his instruments.
Oh, I think that did happen, and what a tragedy. He was a fine young man.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that might have happened to him, he hadn't had the airplane he was flying for very long. Mm-hmm. And I found out some things about the autopilot that could scare you to death.
Oh, really?
Well, for example, when I was practicing landings with my instructor, you also practice if you're using the autopilot, because you might be using that. And when you get to about 500 feet above the airport and you're pretending that there's fog there so you can't land, you have to give it full power, climb, and go around. But the problem is, if you forget to turn off your autopilot, it's set for descending at a certain number of feet per minute, and when you increase the power, that tells the autopilot to increase the speed. So it says, oh, you want to go down faster, okay. And you could have other signals if you're not used to the autopilot.
I think you'd have to be a mathematics instructor to learn to fly a small plane, or of course, any advanced airplane.
Well, not really, but it helps. And I love numbers so much that I love doing things. I like to do things like calculate how much fuel we were using in my head. Mm-hmm. Then I'd order the fuel and tell the fuel person how much fuel it would take. And I usually was within about a gallon. And I just did that for fun. But then I like numbers, and I'm that way.
Yes. You actually had to take gliding lessons to learn how to control a plane if your engines did fail on you?
No, but I did for the fun of it.
Oh, just to know that.
Well, you practice a lot at idle with your instructor, which is the same as what happens if you're just gliding.
What about parachutes? Do you take a parachute with you when you fly?
Well, only if you're doing acrobatics.
Oh.
And if you go up in an acrobatic airplane, actually, you can throw away the door if you want to get out of there. But in most of the small planes, you couldn't get out that fast, and you have to be able to get out of the airplane and get away from it so that you can open the chute. And then if you're flying low, you don't have enough room.
Mm-hmm. What kind of plane did you learn to fly on?
A Cessna 172. This is a high-wing airplane, single engine, 4-passenger airplane. And so when you're learning, the instructor is there with you. But after you learn, you can take friends in the back seat if you want.
I wanted to ask about the traffic. Now, someone like me who doesn't know anything at all about flying, I would assume that if you take off from San Jose Airport and you're flying to, say, New Mexico, to one of these balloon festivals that you've gone to many times, do you fly a straight line?
No.
Does everyone fly a straight line? Tell me about the traffic and how that's regulated.
Okay. Well,
and
that's
so forth.
part of why you file a flight plan. And you give them a plan, so that you can understand it better. Of course, they could also use the GPS, and then you don't worry about radio signals. But they have a system of airways in the air. Of course, they're invisible, but they're paths between two radio signal stations. And if you're following the airway, you're on a course that is between those, and they can track you. The controllers can track that from the air. And then you have an altitude that you fly, and you keep to the altitude that you're given. And airplanes that are flying to the east, for example, will use an altitude that is either an odd altitude if you're flying our instruments, or an odd altitude plus 500 if you're not flying our instruments, if you're just in the sunshine. And if you're going to the west, then you use even altitudes. So that separates you from someone who's flying on the same path in the other direction.
What if you wanted to go off the beaten path, so to speak, like off-road vehicles? They go off into the dunes.
Well,
could you decide to fly over the Grand
if,
Canyon or something?
Well, that national parks are restricted.
Oh.
In the Grand Canyon, too many sightseeing commercial ones go in there. They used to let you fly in there if you followed the plan they had, but I'm not sure you can even fly in there in a small plane anymore. But if you're someplace like over the California Central Valley, maybe you're between Merced and Bakersfield somewhere, you don't have a large city under you, and your chart will let you know that you're in an unrestricted area, and you can fly at any altitude you want in any direction that you want, provided the weather is good. But my husband and I usually kept contact with the controllers because it's safer.
Mm-hmm. When you plan your excursions and so forth, you have to plan. You have to know where the airports are going to be when you might need fuel.
That's right.
So you kind of, in a way, isn't your trip kind of at the mercy of where there's going to be an airport where you can land and refuel?
Well, that's true, but there are so many of them that it's easy to plan so that you can zigzag through places like that. And the United States has many, many airports.
Do you have to reserve in advance to land in an airport and take off from an airport?
Only if you're using one of the major airports like J.F. Kennedy in New York or Dulles in Washington. San Francisco
airports
would be a problem. But if you were flying from San Jose or Reed Hillview, you wouldn't have to do that.
I see. I was wondering about the expenses. Are flying lessons expensive?
Well, my husband made a joke about this. We flew a Mooney aircraft, which is the name of the company because Al Mooney invented the design. But Frank always said you spelled Mooney, Money. And it's very expensive to fly.
Mm-hmm. You have to pay to take off. You have to pay to land. You have to pay to park it. Oh, you don't?
No.
So you fly
Not
into
in
an
the United
airport,
States.
there's no fee then for landing?
Well, it depends upon the airport. If you land at San Francisco, it used to cost you $75 to land there. And small planes are discouraged to land there. If you have an emergency, they'll help you out and you can land most anywhere.
What about like you go on a trip and you want to leave your airplane and rent a car and go somewhere, then will they let you leave your car there? I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely.
your airplane, and then you pay. Do you have to pay to
Yes, you have to
leave it
pay.
there a few days?
It depends upon where it is. And if you want to leave it in a hangar, then it's like paying rent.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to park it outside and just tie it up, then the fees are small. Well, it depends on where it is, but under $10 a night.
Oh, that's cheaper than a car in some places. So
well, you
been,
can find out ahead of time where everything is. There are books that the AOPA, that's the Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association, puts out a handbook every year, and it lists all the airports in the United States with telephone numbers, and you can find out if fuel is available there and what hotels are nearby, if you can rent a car, and you can reserve a rental car if you want.
Now, have you ever had any close calls in your flying?
Well, yes. Sometimes you don't want to talk about them, but I have. I curled up the propeller one day with a propeller strike, and that was very scary, and I should have known better. But I was flying just a little bit too fast, and when I came in to land at Hayward, my propeller hit the runway, but I made a bounce, and to recover from the bounce you need to give it power and go around, and I did not hear the propeller strike the asphalt, so I didn't know I'd curled them up, and so I gave it full power and it didn't behave normally, and then my heartbeat was increasing, and I was able to get it around the landing pattern and to land it, and it seemed like a normal landing when I touched down, but when I shut off the power, the propeller was curled over on both ends.
Oh my goodness!
And then you have to either replace or rebuild the engine.
Where all
so
have you
very
flown?
Expensive mistake.
Oh, where all have you flown now in your many years of flying now?
Well, in the United States, we've crossed the United States completely. Let's see, 7 or 8 times, landing in Long Island, New York, in Rochester, New York, Washington, D.C., but near Washington, D.C., not at the big airport.
And didn't you fly to Australia one time?
Yes, but we flew in Australia. We rented an airplane there and flew.
Oh, I see. You didn't go
for
because
3
I was
weeks.
wondering if you fly from San
well,
Jose, California to Australia. That'd be
well,
pretty
then
risky.
You'd have to, if you could ferry an airplane there, but you'd have to just have one person in it and bring extra fuel and equip it so that it could use the extra fuel, and then stop along the way, places where you could stop, like Hawaii. And, but the airplane that we had, well, Mooney owners like to have a big convention once a year in Texas, where the aircraft factory is. And one person who owned a Mooney and lived in Germany liked to come to that, and he would fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and his Mooney was a clone of ours. But he did it by hopping. He'd go from Newfoundland to Greenland to Iceland to somewhere in Scotland or the British Isles. And you have enough fuel that you can do that. But we never cared to try that because that North Atlantic is cold.
Now, I know that Moonies, you can fly a little bit higher with Moonies, and didn't you take some kind of an oxygen, something went into an oxygen chamber and some
yes.
kind of a...
Well, we had a lot more adventures because the Mooney could do more things like fly higher, and it had built-in oxygen.
Where did you go to the oxygen chamber?
We went to Edwards Air Force Base, and they have a high-altitude test chamber. It's just a cement room that is, maybe 12 feet long and 8 feet wide. And they have benches in there, and they have oxygen masks so that you can sit in there and put on the oxygen. And they are able to pump the air out of the room to simulate what air there would be to breathe at 25,000 feet, for example.
Well,
and then
it
they
sounds
test
like you're
you.
having a lot of fun. And
Well, you find out very interesting things.
Mhm.
You can, for one thing, your color vision goes.
Mhm.
And if they give you one little breath of oxygen, it comes back like magic.
Well, I know you're a very good pilot because you wouldn't be in the 99s if you were not, because it's a very elite group. And I've met a couple of the ladies who have been in it, and I've always been impressed with them. And you've written a book just about flying.
Yes,
It's called
and
Bird
it
Watchers.
takes place at Palo Alto Airport.
And it's actually a novel.
Yes.
Not a mathematics
No.
paper. So, Marjorie, I've really enjoyed hearing about flying, and I don't think I'll ever become a small plane pilot, but it's fun to know one. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Southwest 158, VFR traffic, 11 o'clock, 5 miles just west of the final westbound, the VFR Skyhawk traffic watch, 1,500.
We're looking Southwest 158.
Southwest 158, speed 180 knots toward greater to late DME, contact San Jose Tower 124.0.
180 to 8 DME and going to...
If you would like to contact us to purchase DVDs of any of our programs, you can reach us through the Cupertino Senior Center. Their number is 777-3150. That's 408-777-3150. We also have a website. It's www.thebetterpart.com. If you have any suggestions or ideas for programs you would like us to produce, we always welcome your ideas. And if you're interested in becoming a member of our crew, we welcome you to come down and see what it's all about. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.